Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's edition of Read T-Poss, where I take old stories I've narrated and update into modern audio standards. This particular story is called The Immortal Steel Commando, written by Regal Legal Eagle. Vanguard Academy on Krasoa Primus, Premier Autocracy Officer Training School. Instructriarch Tessa Wakar silently stalked her classroom like the spectrum wraith of divine vengeance, her eyes scanning her pupils with the practiced efficiency of a veteran instructriarch. She would take pauses at various intervals and continuously shift her patrol patterns as well to make sure there wasn't any angle she had missed. Ink was as sloppy as he was unimaginative. The way the sweating Jack kept glancing at his hand, she knew that he had marked his bone dust. A painful yet classic way for Chags to write messages upon their bodies that were very difficult to spot from afar. As she passed him, her retribution was swift as she struck him across the head with her disciplinary staff. The Chak cried out as the blow was intensified by the electrical discharge designed to bypass the Chak's natural armor. "Put your inferior hand flat on the desk and do not turn it over again, or I will cut it off," she hissed out as the Chak began to sweat a bit more, gulped nervously, and pressed his hand flat against the desk. With the pupil reprimanded for being sloppy in his testing, she resumed stalking the rows of desks, looking for other signs of cheating. It wasn't that she discouraged it, exactly. In fact, she far more encouraged it than any other instructriarch, as she often had disciplined cheaters she caught with a beating or two and a small docking of points. No lashes, floggings, or extended punishments. She felt cheating was one of the most exemplary tactics humans used that she wanted her pupils to embrace, but that meant that they needed to get better at it. Ryas was much more sophisticated. The Sivith had a bottle of water at his desk, and as he proceeded with the test, he would occasionally drink from it. Nothing wrong with that, right? Wrong. First of all, Sivith didn't often drink that much water when it was cool out. Plus, the way he'd lift it up would involve holding it before his face in an otherwise unnatural way for a second or two. A sloppier instructriarch would have missed it. As she walked by his deck, he reached out to take another sip, but the instructriarch snatched the bottle off the desk first. "I'm so very parched, Ryas. You wouldn't mind if I took a drink?" she asked. No, I mean, I would gladly share my water with you, Instructriarch." The reptile's tongue flicked in the air nervously as he looked up at her. She gave the pupil a glare for a moment, and then let her eyes flick to the bottle. Nothing seemed outwardly amiss on the outside, just a standard Academy water bottle. She opened it and sniffed for a moment, but the contents did smell like water. She ran her finger over the edge. There it was. Tiny ridges and dots had been very, very carefully worked along the outside of the metal. It might seem like nothing more than a worn, slightly beat-up bottle, but the imperfections were too perfect in their organization. She couldn't get him outright without more concrete proof, but she could ruin his plan. Tilting the bottle back, Tessa Wakar gulped down the rest of the water inside it, and then let out a refreshed sigh. "Thank you, Pupil Ryas. Very refreshing. I'll dispose of the bottle for you." "That's, Ryas gulped as the instructriarch glared at him. "Thank you, instructriarch," he finally muttered in defeat and looked back down at his desk. Before she could take the bottle up to be set into the designated reuse container, however, she spotted pupil Lyavant in front of the corner tug his large ear before his face for a moment. So, with expert aim, the instructriarch chucked the bottle at the small furry mammal's head. Linebit squeaked in surprise and pain as he clutched at his head after the bottle bounced off with a supremely satisfying bonk. "I saw that, Linebit," the instructriarch squawked. "Tug your ear again and see if I don't trim it down," she hissed out, before stomping over to retrieve the bottle and toss it into the designated container. The Nofrosa hunkered down anxiously away from her as she took the time to stand before the class and watch them all. While Linebit had been sloppy, she set her attention on another Nofroso. Qualara was perhaps a most studious pupil who constantly excelled in academic portions of her education. She mostly suffered in physical exams, as most Nosferatu do, but lately she had been improving greatly. This made the instructriarch highly suspicious, especially since she couldn't figure out how the little rodent was cheating. There was nothing unusual on her desk, nor did she try to pull on her ears or clothes for hidden notes. However, as the instructriarch watched, she could tell that something was slightly off. It took her a moment, but she realized her pupil was a bit more squirmy than usual. Her tail would slightly whip around. Her ears would flick at different points. She could also take moments to scratch at herself far more than normal. Side effects from a narcotic. No, she was well versed in study drugs. She lacked the other telltale markings. So Tessa Walker let her gaze slowly drift around the room. Perhaps this was a two-part equation. There. Listen. His tail would furl and unfurl very slightly in different directions. Then he'd preen far more than normal for the supercilious, whose feathers were already in exemplary condition. The two of them were cheating together. The instructor was proud of them. Such a complicated method of communication. They had likely spent more time devising it than they had spent studying for the test. The instructor couldn't even truly call them out on it because she couldn't prove anything. What would she do? Tell them to stop squirming? Even the instructor wasn't so cruel as to tell them to not fidget. That would suddenly be all they could think about. Instead, she studied their cheating communication to start devising patterns in their code. While it meant less time to search for cheating amongst the others, she considered this to be more valuable use of her time. Once she had broken the code, she could use it as proof of whatever she pleased and punish them accordingly. Qualaria hadn't been reprimanded enough recently. She didn't want the pupil to get complacent in her excellence. However, there was a chirp at the door, and she looked over to her surprise to see Patriarch Nellis von Sky enter. "To attention!" she screeched out with a thump of her staff on the floor as the students jumped to their feet. They saluted, and then many had to scramble to grab test tablets they knocked off their desks in their haste to rise up. "At caution!" the Principal waved the students back to the desks. "I'm here simply to observe a moment," he informed them all before privately leaning in closer to Instructriarch. "I wish to witness your pupils in action, Walker." The Instructriarch bristled for a moment at the informal address, but he was her superior, so she quickly soothed her feathers and nodded. "Of course, Principal Nellis von Sky," she replied with his full title. The superioress didn't seem to notice the variance in greetings, or perhaps did, but made it seem like he didn't. The Instructriarch carefully watched him from the corner of her eye. He seemed focused on her pupils. What was his game? "Your pupils are quite exemplary, Walker," the Principal continued after a moment. "The highest overall test scores and the most physical improvement when based on scores from before being given to you. I wish to speak to them a moment once the test is done." This was all highly irregular, and Tessa Walker had a deep distrust for it. But she would be dipped in core before she showed any weakness. If he wanted to see her pupils in action, so be it. She glanced at the clock and then announced to her pupils, 5 dashes left on the test." But Instructor Pupil QZ gasped out, as they could all see that it was supposed to be 15 dashes left. The Instructor just activated a staff to let the electrical crackle answer any questions. So the pupils looked down and began to frantically scribble and tap in their tablets. The Principal gave her a look for a moment, and then resumed his focus on the pupils before them. When the time was up, she tapped her staff against the floor and hit a button to deactivate the tablets. "Time's up," she announced. There were some sighs, a few grumbles, and even a couple of attempts to frantically press buttons on the tablets as they shut down. Then she tapped her staff against the floor once more to get their attention. "Pupils, Principal Nellis von Sky is here, wishes to address you." "Pupils, you've all seen me addressing the class on the parade grounds, and might have witnessed me evaluate cadets in the competitum. But this is likely the first time you see me up close. I'm here because you are all exceeding the average test scores of all other comparable classes significantly. You are to be commended." The Principal nodded to them and allowed the students to half-dash to give excited murmurs to each other. Was this his plan, then, to ruin her carefully crafted environment of stress and fear by expanding their egos? She'd have to work twice as hard to crush any notions of their superiority to make up for it. They would only continue to be the best if she made them think that they were the worst. Principal, however, just gave a shrug and a tail quiver of pleasantness, so she had to nod and return the gesture, as if she were pleased by his praise. He was a crafty son of a bloodless flock. "I'm sure they appreciate such praise, Principal, but they still have much room to improve upon." The Instructor glared at the class, and then they settled down a bit. Best work to show they weren't getting any easy glide, but just because of this. "Some have already shown great improvement," the Principal continued. "Pupil Qualaria, for example. Please raise." Both Qualaria and the Instructor were surprised to hear this, and the mammal blinked before looking from the Principal to the Instructor with anxiety clearly plastered on her face. At first she had just smarts to be terrified. Tessa Walker just gave a tiny nod, and the pupil stood up beside her desk. "Principal Nellis von Sky, pupil second-rate Qualaria reporting," she announced. "From this day, pupil first-rate," the Principal announced. There was much surprised murmuring from around the class, and even the instructor was too stunned to declare. She hadn't submitted any such paperwork. The principal waved her forward and pulled the patch from ribbon from his pocket to give her. When we received a reformer's paper from the underpupil, and a second rate at that, you could imagine my skepticism. No doubt, all a result of your human-centric education under our best instructriarch. Walker ruffled a little at the praise. He was about to fire her, reprimand her, banish her to the Technician Academy in the deep periphery. What was the punishment? She had no idea Qualaria had submitted a reformer's paper. She had no control over such things. Why was this her fault? She tried to think of how to respond, but Qualaria actually spoke first. Principal Park, I am greatly honored by this, but, may I ask, I thought the reformer's paper submissions were anonymous. Oh, we just say they are, the Principal chuckled. What would the point be letting people submit reform documents if we actually didn't keep track of who thinks something is wrong with the system? Far easier to stamp out dissent, unless we like the reform. Qualaria then nodded and let out a nervous laugh. But yours was fantastic. Go on, tell the others what it was about. The supremacy of human will and what we can learn from it, Qualaria nervously said. But the Principal just waved her on, encouraging her. It was, inspired by something our wonderful instructriarch said. Walker glared at her pupil. She better make this good. How humans and superiors possess such a superior willpower. How the superiors have used it to bind the autocracy together, and how the humans use it to march to their death willingly, which no other natural species has so mastered. But that makes me think, why can't we not train it? Test ourselves to, better improve our willpower like humans. Such brilliance, the Principal announced and gave the pupil a pat on the head. Like any other muscle, the thought to test willpower and train it. Quite a stunning work, I must admit, especially from a pupil. Though perhaps also only possible because a pupil thought of it while learning so much. It will take some years, of course, in test programs, but we hope to work this line of thinking into the curriculum. And Instructriarch Walker here, again she bristled at the informal name, will be given a commendation as well. Such a modest Instructriarch to hide away such brilliance within her class. Thank you, Principal Nellis Sky, she replied with another nod. Please, one Sky is fine. She tilted her head a little in confusion at his insistence of informal title. They weren't family or lovers or even flockmates. We'll speak more about this later in the instructriarch evaluations, but expect quite the reward. He reached out to let his wingtips brush hers in a congratulatory manner, and then nodded to the class. We expect great things from you all. A 24-hour pass will be awarded to your class this weekend. Have fun. With that, the Principal left the class as they couldn't contain their excitement and began to talk amongst each other. Qualaria had a happy, slightly dazed look as she walked back to her desk with a new patch and ribbon. Visson was there immediately to actually embrace her while others clustered around to discuss her success. The instructriarch should have clamped down on their celebration and talk immediately, but she couldn't. She was too stunned by the recent turn of events. A direct promise of commendation and reward by the Principal before witnesses, not to mention a superior's insistence on an informal title to a subordinate, the promotion of a pupil without a single official request on her behalf, a reformer's paper that would bring about a lasting change in the curriculum on the first draft. He hadn't even mentioned his disdain for her human-focused philosophy directive, plus her class was being rewarded for the actions of a single pupil. There was only one reasonable explanation for why everything had gone so remarkably well. Heresy. Walker knew the proper procedure when a pupil was suspected of heresy, but she ignored it. After all, the incompetent inquisitors who were assigned to the academy work were only expecting academy heresy, not actual heresy. Plus, Qualaria had just been commended for submitting a reformist paper. If she officially suggested the pupil was a heretic, it would reflect poorly upon her as an instructriarch if there was no proof. Then, to top it all off, Walker preferred to do things herself. She always thought of herself as a claws-on type of person, and her work showed it. In fact, she was still very proud of the knowledge that the human prisoners that she had overseen had all considered her to be the most doable, which was a clear indicator that even humans understood how much she liked to do things and get things done personally. Besides, she had received years of training from her mentor, Sadis Malheb, now the High Inquisitor So she figured she knew a thing or two about rooting out heresy. As an instructriarch, she had full access to the pupils' living quarters, but actually going there would likely cause attention she didn't want. So she was going to have to be subtle, sneaky. She was going to have to use all of her full skill learned as an instructriarch to pull this off without being noticed. Once she arrived at the door that led to the section of living quarters she wanted, she glanced around the corner to get an eye on the lone exceptionalis guard. He was sitting at his desk, bored, because the posting was as boring as it got. Getting an eye for the angle around the corner and the best spot along the walls to bank her until shot, Tessawaka leaned out and chucked Rice's water bottle at the geometrically precise position in the wall. It banked off another wall and then flew into the guard's head with the same satisfying bonk as before. Ah! The guard let out a startled squawk and rose up. Tessawaka then mimicked the sound of running feet, slightly projecting it around the corner, which got the guard to run down toward her corner. "I saw some pupils run that way," she told the guard once he rounded the corner and saw her in the hall. None the wiser to her deception, he nodded and rushed after who he thought to be the culprits. This left her round the corner and implement the next stage of her plan. The door was also watched by a security camera. It had a 3-chip oscillating matrix system that was impossible to hack, disable, or fool. She reached up with her staff and nudged it to the side so it was no longer watching the door. Then she walked up and slid Instructor Verkarlita's passcode through the door to open it up. If anyone ever checked the logs, he'd have to either explain he'd lost his passcard or try to think of a reason why he'd be in the student living quarters, neither of which would go well for him. That would show him for staging up her offering at the Instructriarch seasonal party. Once inside the living quarters, she glanced at a nearby map to confirm the layout was as it should be. Most classes had students divided into floors based on species, gender, and other such characteristics. But Tessawaka had made sure her entire class lived in the same area and made sure no one was with someone of the same species. She also tried to keep them mixed gender as well, so that none of them could get truly comfortable. The idea was to keep them as stressed out and on edge as possible, making it easier for her to crack their little minds open and shape them like clay. A happy, well-adjusted pupil was far harder to break after all. Fisson was roomed with Quallaria, which helped explain why they'd been cheating together. Fisson also excelled at the physical portions of training, which was likely why Quallaria had started to do better. They must be helping one another. She supposed that cooperation like that was beneficial to students, but what did Fisson get out of it? His test scores weren't poor, but he possibly helping her for altruistic reasons. You know, who did things like that? Heretics. Of course, the autocracy was built upon the backs of those who worked together for the common good, but she wasn't training any one of those people. She was training officers. Her own rise to power had been a ruthless culling of anyone less competent or capable than her. And someone, even those more capable but less cunning, ruthless, or even lucky. If Fisson assisted Quallaria in raising her physical aptitude scores, where was his gain? Since he was an offerer, so it wasn't like he'd be placed in a similar field where would she owe him professional favors down the line. It just made her look better and him worse in comparison. She needed to get to the bottom of this dangerous behavior. What would bring about this change? Fisson had been plenty of ruthless until now, and she'd had high hopes for the Superialis. Could Quallaria be blackmailing him somehow? No. She was so far inferior fighting ability. He'd just subdue her and bring her treachery to light, or just beat her until she obeyed. It had always worked for the Instructriarch with various subordinates in the past. Slipping through the shadows of the living quarters, she was glad they mostly kept to their rooms at this hour. She heard a few bits and pieces of conversation, mostly just excitement over the weekend pass. When she got to the assigned room with Fisson and Quallaria, she gently tried to handle and found it locked. She didn't want to use Latar's keycard and considered her options when an infurious janitor walked by pushing a broom. She snagged the little wretch by the collar. "Ugh!" It squawked out in fear and surprise for a moment until Walker could clamp his beak shut. Then she picked him up and swiped him across the door until she heard it pop open. She sent the janitor back down and gave him a swift claw to the tail feathers to make him scurry off. Then she pressed into the room as quietly as she could, staff at the ready. What would she find? Weapons and explosives of pupil rebellion, forbidden literature, detaining the benefits of misguided democracies, a petition for equal rights. She shuddered at the thought. However, as she stepped into the room, she found it to be disappointingly average. Quallaria was lying at the end of her bed, watching a vid screen on her far wall. She recognized it as Quallaria's electronics competency project and was allowed since it was made by a pupil. Scanning around, she saw the desks looked to be full of normal, allowed books. Some more esoteric and complicated volumes, but nothing forbidden outright. There was no evidence of anything even remotely heretical. Back already, Wakaf rose up as Quillaria said that. I figured it would take you longer to sneak back in with all the... The Nostroso looked over and then also froze as she realized that Wakaf wasn't someone else. Instructor, she gasped out and then tried to lunge forward, reaching for the vid screen. The program, that must be the heresy. Displaying her superior speed and combat skills, she leapt forward, planting her foot on the small mammal's back and driving her to the floor with a thump. Her staff charged and readied, but held mere feathers from the pupil's scribbling face. What is it we have here? She asked, smug and secure in her knowledge that she'd been correct in assuming her best student had only been successful thanks to heresy. But when she looked at the screen, she blinked in confusion. It was a cartoon. I am the Immortal Steel Commando, and I am sworn to fight corruption in every dark corner of the galaxy. There was an animated Superiorist in some sort of human-style black armor. As she watched, he got into a gunfight with some Savesh, who were led by a massive Gren. Why would that even be possible? She frowned but kept watching. The Superiorist's weapon was knocked from his hand by a sneaky Savesh, who got in close with a shock baton. Well, this would be over quickly. But then, to her surprise, the Superiorist grabbed and attacked the Savesh with his claws, then proceeded to use anything nearby as a weapon. He'd steal guns from his assailants, use pieces of furniture. Even as he was knocked around, he kept fighting against superior odds. He was fighting like a human. What is this? She demanded to know, but before Quillaria could answer, the show did it for her. Impossible! How did you fight against losing odds? I gave you every chance to run away. You were disarmed, yet you fight on. The Grand Rock Crusher was demanding to know, even as the mighty fists tried to smash the quicker Superiorus. I was raised by humans, yet loyal to the spirit of the autocracy. I am no mere inquisitor. I am the Immortal Steel Commando. He shouted out and had grabbed the blade of some kind from a dead Savish. As he rushed forward, the Gren screamed and raised his fists. Then the screen went black and white, and there was some sort of flash for some reason. When it returned to normal color, the Superiorus was on one knee, popped up by the sword as he gasped out and clutched his side. So he'd lost then. However, it showed the Gren once more, a bit of blood dripping from his lip. Impossible, he muttered, before the shot pulled back, and he suddenly split in two pieces, which fell in different directions. What? You can't just cut through a Gren. What is this? It's a cartoon, which is for children, but it's so violent. The instructor really wasn't sure what to make of what she was seeing. It had to be heretical, but it wasn't really displaying the autocracy poorly, was it? Steel Commando, you came for me. Walker blinked as she saw a female Superiorus bound to a chair. The main character slowly pushed himself up to his feet with a sword then. I told you I would, my little moon lily. Were they love interests? Why didn't he call her by whatever her casual name was? There was some sort of connection between them, obviously. You risked your life for me? Why? I don't pay your clutch. You brave fool. I don't understand, the female on the show gasped out. Neither do I, Walker echoed. Don't you get it? The hero asked her as he went to unbind her. I'm immortal, you know. He laughed and then groaned out, coughing up a bit of blood as he sagged over. The now free female gasped and moved to help him back up. You don't seem all that immortal to me, she chided, with a worried expression, brushing some blood-soaked feathers from his eyes. My physical form might not be, but that's not the point. My immortality is in what I represent. It is an ideal. I am the very spirit of the autocracy, don't you understand? I'm why we'll never fall, why we'll never die, because you can't kill ideas. One day you'll understand. He coughed a bit harder and staggered as she tried to help carry him. Well, your ideas need to see a doctor, they both laughed. And then some sort of human-like music began to play, as for some reason, a list of names and jobs began to scroll past the screen. It wasn't just important people either. It was like it was listing everyone who had worked on the cartoon. Who did that? I need some answers, the instructor demanded. Then, as she stepped off Quillaria and pulled her up to her feet, it's a show about the Immortal Steel Commando, his family, the Jesse. The Nostroso had picked up her tail and started to wring it nervously when the instructor interrupted her. That's my family's cousin's block, Wakar squawked in surprise. They died some time ago in a terrible accident. Well, that's actually sort of how I came across the show. I was researching you for a bit. I thought the show was a factual documentary or something. Obviously it's not, but, anyway, so his family ship crashed on a human frontier world before the war, and he was raised by humans of a super secret combat order of monks. They trained him to be even more willful than normal. How not to focus on a single weapon, but on all things that could be a weapons. How everything is little more than a tool which should be an implement of an extension of his will. As Kolari explained, the instructor arc blink, that all sounded like the things she'd been trying to teach her pupils to an extent. But to be aided by humans is heresy, Wakar commented, trying to figure things out in her head. Well, see, but this was before the war, so not technically heresy yet, and he's not really aided by them. You only ever see them in flashbacks to his training. Before the war broke out, this shadowy organization known as Sand attacked the monastery with cowardly toxic gas. It killed the humans, but not the Steel Commando, which is what he had become just before the attack. It's a position of ultimate skill and prophecy and stuff amongst the humans, Gloria kept explaining. Commando. I know this word. Wakan rolled the human word around her head a moment, trying to remember where it was from. See, that's a human word for excellent soldier. It's one of the names for their black armor infantry, the Novrasa mentioned. Of course, Waka gasped as she remembered it from the war, from the human for command. And then, also an O. The human tongue was strange sometimes, but she did remember the word now, yes. In fact, one of those human commandos had been emphatic about her doableness. Yet another sign of her impressive skills, that a commando would compliment her on her ability to do things. When the war broke out, the Vanguard, of course, found him. He was given over to the care of Inquisitor Muda Selheb. Quiliriath continued. Seriously, Wakar glared. Muda Selheb? She asked incredulously. That's obviously my old mentor, Sodus Molheb. Yes, but it's a show, so I'm guessing they couldn't use her real name. Anyway, since he's the last heir of the family, he's actually really rich, and with the help of the Inquisitor and some sympathetic Inquisitors, they set him up in the periphery to do things they can't. He's out to fight the Sand and to keep the autocracy on the path of greatness. He fights corruption and alliance saboteurs and all kinds of stuff. It's not heresy. It really isn't. If it's not heretical, then how come I've never heard of it? And how come you were so terrified when I discovered you? She asked with a hiss. Well, it's not sanctioned, Quillaria squeaked in fear. But that's all. I got a lot of positive messages about how to work together. Our strength and unity, willpower, and having strong comrades means a strong autocracy. Waka let her feathers bristle a bit as she heard that. It all sounded dangerously close to heresy, but it wasn't exactly wrong either. And why did it seem so connected to her life? Hey, I'm back. She looked over, and the doors opened and wiped Vincent's butt as he walked in, through backwards. The lockpick trick worked exactly like it had in the show, and I got all the good stuff. His arms were full of snacks, desserts, and other food items from the commissary. Not the pupils either, but the Instructriarch's commissary with the good stuff, all right. When he saw the Instructriarch, he gasped up, "Ah!" The packages of food launched up in the air as his hands reflexively tossed up in surprise. He managed to catch some, but the others fell to the floor. Instructriarch, I'm so glad I found you. I found a broken latch in the commissary, and I didn't want all the food to let out so to go to waste. So I grabbed it and came straight here to you to show you the food that was left out and not stolen. Vincent stammered out an excuse so terrible Walker just arched her brow and glared at him. When she noticed the cage flippet was about to break free of the door since the drop had damaged it, she stepped forward and struck. Just as the rodent wriggled free of her staff, swooped down, scooping the creature up in the air with a squeal. A light shock stunned it, and she grabbed it out of the air with a decisive snap of her beak. The pupils watched her wide-eyed as she slipped down the rodent's tail and reached past Vincent with her staff to shut the door behind them. As she gulped down the snack, she walked over to the bed closest by and sat down on it, resting her staff across her lap. Well, I suppose we're going to have to watch this from the beginning so that I can make a proper judgment. I promise you'll like it, Quillaria insisted, and rushed to the vid screen to set up whatever the first episode was. Vincent, meanwhile, quickly picked up the food to set it out on the desk for them to all share. It's got amazing fight scenes and also really amazing character development. It's amazing. We can't stop watching. Is this what inspired your reformist paper? Wakar asked, as they set about preparing the room for a proper viewing atmosphere. Yes, it just made sense to me. I mean, you said it yourself, willpower is what makes the autocracy so strong, right? And he's super willful, but the humans have figured out how to fight to the death. Why can't we learn from that and train for it? Qualaria nodded eagerly. Walker didn't think she was wrong, and she was very curious about the show, but she had some strange feeling that there was something nefarious about it. All she knew was that she'd find out more one way or another. Deep Spinewood Traverse System JX-194 Flotilla Heimdall. This is hilarious, Captain Mason of Naval Intelligence just smiled as he watched the vid screen before him. I know it's amazing. Colonel Ehrenberg of the Military Office of Moral agreed, with a nod of her head. They were watching the most recent episode of the Immortal Steel Commando. They both learned Auto, the slang name for the language most widely spoken across the autocracy, so they didn't need subtitles. It's so subtle. Well, not subtle, but you know what I mean, Captain Mason continued as his counterpart laughed and nodded. Yeah, I know. On the surface, it all looks like pro-autocratic and all that. Lures them in. But all the while, they know he only got this far because he was trained by humans. She summed up, and he nodded. When it starts to subvert things, it'll be really amazing to see what happens. What are your plans for that? When she asked him that, Captain Mason frowned and gave her a confused look. My plans? I don't have anything to do with this. Are you looking for input, you mean? This is your work, isn't it? Now it was her turn to look confused. Me? No. Do you have any idea how hard I had to beg and plead for 6 artists I've got to make my propaganda posters and stuff? You know the Admiralty. Every artist is one more dead-weight mouth that isn't a sailor, soldier, or technician. She echoed their common views on artists. There's no way I could get a whole animation team together for something like this, she pointed at the screen. I thought this was you guys. You've got the budget. Us? No, Mason shook his head. The budget, maybe, but not the inclination. You guys are the PsyOps people. They were both quiet for a moment, and then looked back at the screen. If it's not you and it's not me, then it can't be us. So who is it? Avansoa Secundus, Inquisitarch Fortress. High Inquisitarch Sadus Melheb carefully wrote on the parchment before him, using a quill. The feathers had been plucked from his father's favorite inferior's concubine, Rusa. Though she obviously wasn't Melheb's mother, she had done a great deal of the work to raise him, and had always been there when he was a child. So when she had died, he had many of her feathers turned into quills, which he used when writing important documents. It was his small way of ensuring that even the lowest of their great society had some connection to the important events that would shape their society. High Inquisitarch, your theory was correct. He glanced up a moment as Inquisitarch Venice Telwit, who was standing across the room from him. Few liked to get close to his desk, because then they'd see more of the dangerous cliff it was built directly over. Few understood why he would build his office overlooking a lake of lava pouring over the edge into the abyss. Avansoa Secundus was a brutal volcanic planet that could only barely support life, and with much struggle, Melheb liked it for its very reason. It reminded him of the necessity of what he did. My theory, he asked absently, returning his focus to his calligraphy. The 3 animator groups, High Inquisitarch, when compared with the control group, the one we beat and were more brutal with, did work faster, but made so many mistakes they ended up being the slowest. While the group we treated with leniency and rewards was slower at first, but quickly became the most productive, Telwood explained. That was my hypothesis, Inquisitarch, not my theory. He corrected his subordinate. Ah, yes, of course, High Inquisitarch. Telwood nodded, accepting the correction. Rotate the guards and inquisitors overseeing each group. Tell them there's been an adjustment to procedure, and begin treating all groups like I have instructed. He had little doubt that his plans wouldn't work, but he preferred to test things when he had a proper chance. Are they almost finished for the 2nd season? I'm told they're polishing it up even now. The 3rd group is making corrections on the work of the 1st, Talbot informed him. Good. Once they set up a new routine, we'll implement the competition board to appear as if it will pit the groups against each other. Of course, since they are isolated, we can say whatever we like on the matter, to reward or punish them as I see fit. Melheb added with a slowing of his hand as he came to his signature. He carefully added more ink to the quill so that he could really take his time with the flourish. What is the show even for, sir? I'm still not sure I understand the point of it all, Talwood asked next. Melheb's hesitation nearly ruined his signature, but he was able to correct his hand and keep everything the way it should be. He took a slow breath and set the quill aside to make sure no stray drops of ink stained his page, and then looked at the Inquisitarch across the room from him. I must say I'm surprised, though, of course, must congratulate you on your promotion, Venice Telwit. My promotion, sir? The Superalius tilted his head in confusion. Yes, of course. You must have been promoted, Melheb insisted. Clearly, that's what happened, and yet I'm very surprised by this as I'm still alive. He trailed off. Then he looked at each of his own shoulders for a moment. Very surprised indeed, because I still bear the mantle and rank of High Inquisitor. Isn't that correct? Yes, High Inquisitor. Telwet was still obviously confused, but now also rather concerned. You see, I was very confused there because it sounded a lot like a mere inquisitor was questioning me and my orders. His tone turned to ice. Despite the heat of the planet outside his window, he could see Telwood squirm immediately and gulp. That's not... He started to try and defend himself. You are not questioning me, are you, Inquisitor? Melhib stood up and then, because I would hate to have to throw you off my balcony after all the good work you've been doing. He gestured to the balcony overlooking the lava falls outside. No, High Inquisitor, I was not questioning your orders, I was just... Talbot began to quickly stammer. Good, Melhib cut him off. I'm glad to hear that you aren't questioning me. He motioned to the door then. You may go. Yes, High Inquisitor. Talbot bowed and then quickly retreated to the door. Melhib turned to look out the window and used the reflections to wait until Talbot was about to leave. Inquisitor, he called out, but didn't turn around. Yes, High Inquisitor. Talbot paused, claws tightly gripping the doorknob nervously. Report to Inquisitor Guesswin. You are to tell him that you are to be flogged. 15 lashes should do it, he informed him. But High Inquisitor, for the test scripts, you see fit to punish them in such a fashion? Talbot gasped out. They are inferior beings, Inquisitor, and as such deserve treatment equal to their inferior capabilities. Are you suggesting that you are an inferior being, Inquisitor? Melhib, watching Talbot's reflection squirm. No, High Inquisitor, he gulped out. 15 lashes, Talbot, he reminded him. Let us hope that the lashes of the whip shall dissuade any further improper lashing of your tongue. He let that hang in the air for a moment. Unless you prefer a more permanent solution, he ventured. No, High Inquisitor, for 15 lashes. Inquisitor Guessman, right away. The Superiorless nodded so much that his head was bobbing as he retreated from the room. Now alone, Melhib watched the lava tumbling over the side of the cliff. It was calming to him. His desk chimed, and he saw a report that Tessa Walker had apparently spearheaded a reform of the curriculum to add willpower exercises. He smirked a little. Poor Tessa Walker, if only she didn't lack proper vision. She was capable up to a point, but she kept thinking small. She thought that if she could change one mind, the right mind, and form one officer powerful enough to achieve proper greatness, then she'd be elevated alongside them. Melhib wasn't burdened by such small thinking. He watched the torrent of molten lava pouring down from the nearby volcano. Such power, such intense destructive capabilities, all held back by nothing more than a sufficient amount of dirt. No, he was not as small-minded as Walker. He had plans, far greater plans. The Immortal Steel Commander was only one small piece of that. He would change the rules of their great society itself, and with that he would make them all stronger. For he had a real Steel Commando, a being of willpower so intense and mighty they could stop the flow of lava river should they desire it, and one day they would rule the autocracy. The Council just didn't know it yet. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.